Hello and welcome to another edition of 67 Hail Hail Live. I'm your host, John McGinley. With me is Asim, and as always, we're here to talk over everything that's been going on at Celtic over the last week or so and into the future now that we know for sure that Brendan Rodgers is going to be our new manager for the new season. Now, we know how we had a video last week with myself and Stevie kind of assuming that Rodgers was going to be coming in. I know Hamish did a video on Monday from his own perspective, but today we're going to bring Asim into things and get his view on it all. We've not had him on the channel for a while since all this has gone down. And then we're going to try and get into the nuts and bolts of what this summer is and how exciting it could be for Celtic and you know what's needed. All the talking points, basically, of the summer ahead now that Rodgers has been confirmed, and we can kind of hang our hat on that little bit of information. Asim, how was the process of appointing Brendan Rodgers for you from the moment Ange left to all the speculation to the final confirmation? How are you feeling about everything? I've noticed personally, I've noticed that you're perhaps a little bit more excited than a lot of people. And I know there's some kind of feeling on the other side of things, but from your tweets and everything I've seen from you,
Yeah,
you seem quite upbeat about this one.
yeah. Hi everyone. It's been a few weeks since I was last on. I think it was on the eve of the cup final, and it's crazy, obviously, how much can change in the space of 3 weeks. If you said to me then that we'd be going into the new season with Brendan Brendan Rodgers in charge, me and a lot of others would have thought you're crazy. So it's been surreal, almost. I think quite quickly after Ange's departure, when I seen the short list of candidates. Initially, for me, I seen the list, and I think Graham Potter was kind of my first choice because I just didn't think the reality of Rodgers coming back was even an option to even consider or contemplate. But as the week went on and you seen the list, for me it quite quickly became apparent that I thought he was the outstanding candidate from a football point of view. Just looking at his CV and obviously what we know he can do and what I think he's gone on to achieve even more when on his return. Obviously, we'll get into the other side of it and the kind of whole politics and all that side. But if you're talking purely from a football perspective and who I think's the best man for the job, as you mentioned, I'm pretty happy with it and quite excited to see what he can do this time round.
I come down pretty much where you come down on it. I do think it's a solid appointment from the club. I think when you take emotion out of it and you look at the managers who were on the market, Rodgers is certainly in the top one, two, or three that you would be looking to appoint, and possibly even number one for a lot of people. And I think the fact that the club went out and just got him in the door within a fortnight was actually a pretty good move. And
Yeah,
actually, and it's not often the Celtic board gets too much praise, but the kind of ruthlessness for them to just go for Rodgers and get him in the door, I think, is fairly impressive, especially when they're talking about making him the highest paid manager in the club's
yeah,
history, etc., backing him all these transfer funds, etc. It does feel good from a football and perspective side of things. As I said, last week, I'm never going to be best pals with Rodgers, just given the way everything went down. But we don't need to be his best pal. We just need to coexist and get on with the business of winning. And I think that we have a manager in place to do that now. And it's exciting where we go from here. Just kind of touching on the what it means for Celtic just a little bit, because a lot of the reports, and there's been PR from both camps on this side of things. I noticed a lot of reports in the Scottish Daily Mail that might have been from people kind of from the Rogers side camp of things. I've noticed a lot of reports in the Scottish Sun that might have been from the Celtic side of things. All of them seem to indicate that Rogers was looking for assurances from the Celtic board that they were going to push forward with an ambitious vision, and that means investment, and that means going after the top drawer in all respects, on and off the pitch. For me, that's almost as exciting of a development or exciting of a thing than him coming in as a coach, himself.
yeah.
Is that how you view things too? Is it kind of like Celtic aren't messing about here? We're going to try and kick on from this position of strength.
Yeah, 100%, John. I think, it's twofold. In terms of the board, you're right. We're quick to criticise in the past when we feel they haven't gone about things in the most productive way they can. But I definitely, feel that the credit is due here because Obviously when Ange left us, we were in a difficult spot in terms of, it was quite unexpected. It seemed out of nowhere. And for us to then bring in such a high caliber manager so quickly and, so almost effortlessly. And then, as you said, the kind of stories about what assurances and promises Rodgers has been given, for me, that is a big encouragement because you look at it from his perspective as well. He wouldn't. I don't think he's the type of manager. He's very ambitious. There's been a lot of chat as to, people have got different opinions, obviously, about how he left, and we've all kind of shared those in the past. But one of his major things was when he felt he wasn't going to be getting backed, or when the club wouldn't match his ambition going forward in terms of how he wanted to progress year on year. That's when his time would be up, and essentially that kind of came to fruition. So for him to come back, you would like to think it's again on the basis that he has been given those kind of promises that we're now moving forward as a club. We may be in a better position than we were back then to financially invest in players and in terms of infrastructure behind the scenes, things like that. So for me, you're right. I think when you just look at it purely from a football perspective and you look at the caliber of coach we've now got and the fact that it seems like the club are going to back him, it's a very exciting time. And I think that's why a lot of fans who may initially not have been totally on board, as you've said, you don't need to be his best pal, or we don't need to maybe get emotionally invested as we have done with previous managers. But the fact that he's coming in, you almost now think, right, okay, that means that the club means business and he means business as well. And he sees this as a good opportunity to further enhance his own profile and almost make amends for what happened last time.
There's an interesting question from one of our subscribers here, Adrian McGuinness, who says, lads, is it fair to say we are getting a better manager in Rodgers' second time around? Now, that's an interesting thing to consider for a couple of reasons. You look at his Leicester time at Leicester, and sure, you can say, obviously it's ended pretty badly. They were well on their way to a relegation by the time he was dismissed. But his record before that wasn't too bad. I think it's 2 fifth-place finishes. Obviously, he won the first FA Cup in Leicester's history. I mean, that's something that you can't really discount. I'm not sure if we're getting a better manager. I mean, it's hard to make that determination until how we see it all play out. But I don't think experience ever hurts a manager, does it, Asim?
No, personally, I think we are getting a better manager. He's gone there, like you said. He went to Leicester when they were struggling initially. That's why he got that job. Obviously, they recently sacked Puel, and I think he did a very good job. Obviously, people will look at the most recent season, in which case, yeah, it wasn't great by any means. But those for Leicester to finish top 5 2 seasons in a row was at the start of the season. A lot of their fans and a lot of neutral observers would think that's a great season. I think because of the way they faltered towards the end and almost threw away Champions League qualification in both years, but second season winning the FA Cup, third season I think they finished 8th, and a Europa Conference League semi-final. For me, that's a a very, very good few years there. So I think, and as you said, the experience of working down there up against top quality managers like Klopp, Guardiola, and I think he's beat all the big teams. In his first few seasons. So I think we're getting a manager who'll have learnt from his time there, who will come back knowing what worked well the first time here, what he needs to improve on, and in terms of how we can maybe develop. And a lot of the chat recently has been about now the next step for us is how we can become better in Europe. And again, I think that's something that he'll have used his experiences down there. And I think we are going to see an improved manager.
So worth noting as well, he took Leicester City to the semi-finals of the UEFA Europa Conference League. They got beat by Roma. Obviously, Leicester have a far bigger budget than a lot of teams in that competition, but just interesting to know that as well. I'm not sure whether we're getting a better manager. I don't think we're getting a worse manager. I think it's a fair. I don't think I don't think he's lost it. I don't think he's lost his way, basically. And I think when you look at it, and for me, when I'm looking at his time at Leicester, where it goes wrong is the things that you hope Celtic are addressing with his appointment, in that perhaps he wasn't aligned with Leicester on transfers. They weren't going after the players that he wanted to. Perhaps there was I know that he brought Congleton for a while. He brings his own guy in. He's not doing that at Celtic, and I think that's good. I don't know if we want Brendan Rodgers to be the all-encompassing managerial overlord of Celtic at the moment. I don't think that's quite what we need. I think we've got Mark Lawwell in as our kind of head of scouting and recruitment, and we've got people in there. As long as Brendan Rodgers is aligned with the board and the football department on new signings, then I think that addresses a lot of where the Leicester thing went wrong and a lot of where it started to go wrong from
Yeah.
at Celtic. Now, when I say start to go wrong for him, it's still because he won 7 trophies out of 7 and he was well on his way to, to another treble. But what I mean is that just started to become a disconnect between himself and the board. And that's really what we've got to watch out for this time again. I emphasised that last week, but we don't want to get into that kind of situation. We just have to hope that the kind of water's under the bridge on that one. They've drawn a line on it and they're saying, like, we'll move forward together and really, fulfil the potential of what a Rodgers Celtic could look like.
Yeah, as much as I've been quite obviously openly positive and backing this appointment, that's not to say obviously on the other side to be balanced there are concerns as well. From as you said, his time, everyone felt that obviously we peaked in his first season, and gradually the second and third season, the style of football and just the ruthlessness of that first season wasn't matched, which was always going to be difficult. It was an invincible season, but I think that does coincide with the recruitment as you mentioned. And I think if we look back, I think Hamish mentioned it as well, Rodgers historically does tend to kind of start off really well, first, second season, and then it does tail off. We've seen that at Liverpool. We've seen that obviously again at Leicester and in his first spell with us. But again, we need to look at maybe the bigger picture as to why that might be. Could it be the fact that with Celtic, you've seen that the first season we had some big signings, Dembele, Sinclair. Obviously, we see Parry Roberts on from his loan move. And then gradually you've seen the kind of recruitment get worse, and there's a lot of different arguments as to who's responsible for that. Was it just the fact that we weren't backing him financially as much as we had previously, or just was his eye for a player not as strong? So these are things that obviously will be a concern, and again, as you've mentioned, it's a case of hopefully the board and the backroom staff and Rodgers himself just working to realise what can be done better this time round. And yeah, that's where you're encouraged when you hear the reports of the kind of transfer backing that we might get, because you just feel with the added funds that we might have now, we'll be able to pick a far superior type of player than we were seeing maybe in his second and third season.
And I think the other side of it is that it's not the end of the world if he's only here for 2 or 3 years. I mean, that might just be what is the shelf life of a Celtic manager these days? Like, does it go longer than 2 or 3 years? I mean, I think 3 years is a pretty sweet spot. I think it's 3 years is a pretty sweet spot, and for most clubs, across football, it's a nice cycle, and you can kind of build. What Celtic need to do long term is obviously join the dots and connect the links between manager, and I think another perhaps I don't know if it's underrated because a lot of people are talking about it, but I think retaining John Kennedy, retaining Gavin Strachan, having Cal McGregor there as captain. There's a lot of continuity between last season and this season. It's not like we're facing a massive rebuild this summer. And I think that continuity is going to serve us well. And hopefully that's what allows us to kick on as much as anything. Just on that though, just speaking about kind of moving from the Ange era into the Brendan Rodgers era, where do you see the future for kind of Ange's specialist players? And by that I mean like Dyson Maeda on the wing. I'm talking about Greg Taylor playing almost as an inverted fullback at times, really coming into those central areas. What do you see for the kind of the specialisms of the Ange way and how that adapts to Brendan Rodgers? For instance, just an example, is he going to utilise Dyson Maeda in a way that he might have utilised a pacey player of the past, right? Rather than having him pressing, really having a player there who can break the lines almost and feed them in behind.
Yeah, that was one of my main concerns when Ange obviously left, was the fact that he was such a big part in our recruitment and our style of play and just everything really from top to bottom. It felt like this one man was kind of leading the charge, and when he left, then you did worry, like in terms of a lot of the players that he's brought over from the Asian market. A lot of them would have came on the premise that they've worked with him before and they know him well and had that relationship with him. And likewise, the style that we've implemented with the inverted fullbacks and the high press. So there was a concern with that, but I think with bringing in such a high caliber coach like Rodgers, who's obviously well known to a lot of the players, and the likes of Callum McGregor, I've seen in his interview today, speaks so highly of him. Added to the fact that we've kept a lot of the backroom staff who again will know the players well. I think that will help with the continuity of certain players who may have, been looking at their futures and thinking, where does this leave us? I think having someone like Rodgers in might impact them, and they might be like, this I want to stay around or I want to be part of this. Whereas had we gone elsewhere with maybe an untested manager, you just don't know. In terms of style of play, I'm intrigued again because they are different styles. They're both obviously attacking
Hmm.
managers. They both like to keep possession. They both like to play it from the back. But I think Rodgers' style is a bit more methodical. Well, in saying that,
Yeah.
the first season I thought we were pretty explosive that first season. The
Hmm.
style of football. I think a lot of people sometimes obviously remember the second and third not being as great, but the first season would rival some of our best football is under Ange as well. So you're hoping to see some of that. But in terms of adaptations, so just to finish off this, sorry,
Yeah.
I wonder if because Rodgers is coming in on the back of such a successful season and on the back of a group of players who really seem like they know what they're doing or are in sync. I wonder if he might be tempted to not tweak it too much,
Mm.
initially because last time when he came in, obviously it was a complete overhaul, in terms of style and just generally the player turnover as well. Whereas this time, I wonder if he, what you might want to see what works well and maybe keep, adapt his style to what's already in place rather than a complete change. That will be good to see, but yeah, I guess we'll soon see that.
The good thing is, as well, this summer is obviously we don't have qualifiers, and I know obviously infamously we had qualifiers that first summer that Brendan Rodgers took us, and we eventually qualified for the groups, but had the Lincoln Red Imps drama, all of
Yeah,
that came with that, and I know for a fact that Brendan Rodgers did not like European qualifiers. I don't think any manager at Celtic does. I think it just adds a spanner into the works of preparation on and off the pitch. You don't know what caliber of player you can bring in. You don't know what who wants to stay and leave based on Champions League, etc. I think it's far more settled this summer,
yeah,
and I think it looks like the team will be back at Lennox Town at the start of July. Then they head off to Portugal for a training camp there, and then they head off to Asia for matches and training over there. So there's a lot going on, and I think you'll have a really good opportunity to get stuck into the squad basically. And someone I can't remember who I can't bring up now because it was a while back, but a hallmark of what Rodgers did last time was really improve the players who were already at the club and instill a
yeah,
confidence into them that they might not have had prior to his arrival. And while this squad are definitely on a high
yeah.
of a really strong treble win, be interesting to see what players start to thrive more under Brendan Rodgers and have even more confidence or even more of a free rein to really get stuck into their game at Celtic. Obviously, we don't know who's going to be staying or going this summer yet, and I think there could be a fair amount of you know moving around in that respect. But I'm looking at players like Jota. I'm looking at even a player like Callum McGregor who can really improve even more from where they are now. Brendan Rodgers loved wingers when he was first at Celtic. You think of Patrick Roberts was sensational for a spell. Brendan Rodgers immensely improved James Forrest's game as well and gave him a new sense of confidence and belief. So it'd be really. I'm really excited to see what Rodgers can do with a player like a Jota or a Matt O'Reilly and where they can go from this point in their Celtic career.
Yeah, there's no getting away from it. He's an elite coach. He's and you're right, one of the main characteristics and hallmarks was the player development. I think Scott Brown played his best football under him.
Yeah.
James Forrest, as you mentioned, Callum McGregor, he totally revitalised Scott Sinclair's career. He wasn't doing too great, and then suddenly he had a brilliant first season. And in Callum McGregor's interview today, he touched on that as well, just how much the players, they know his high demands. That's one of the other things as well. You just know that he sets such high expectations and demands, and that will just feed on from obviously what Ange had as well. So it's similar in that respect. But the likes of Hatate, as you say, Jota, these kind of players, I think, could really thrive under Rodgers' kind of man management and coaching styles. Obviously, yet to determine that, but I'm quite excited to see what kind of development we can get from, as you've said, an already a really encouraging group of players who've came off the back of a really good season, but will want to push on even further. And I think that's what excites a lot of fans right now is to see what Rodgers can do, because arguably you could say that the squad of players we've got now is better than any squad that he had in his 2.5 seasons before. So it bodes well for that, and having that continuity again, like we say, the backroom staff will know the players well, and they'll be able to be in Rodgers' ears as well as to what works and what doesn't.
So new signings might not even be too far away. We know from reports in Norway today that Odin Tiago Holm of Valerenga is reportedly undergoing medicals after a fee was agreed between two clubs for him to come into to Celtic. He's a young Norwegian midfielder, young prospect who I think was very highly rated as a teenager and is kind of perhaps not fulfilled that, the so-called wonder kid promise, but has certainly gained a lot of experience of top flight football in Norway. Be interesting to see him coming in and kind of affecting. And I think that shows as much as anything that a lot of Celtic's transfer targets this summer will have already been identified and signed off on by people at Celtic. I feel like obviously Rodgers will have a say, but Celtic do their transfer preparation work well in advance. And I think having Mark Lawwell there will be a big part of that. So I think if one or two names start arriving early, people will ask questions of it, but I don't think that's too abnormal in modern football for players and transfer decisions to be made as teams transition between managers.
Yeah, Ange kind of alluded to that back in January, that he was already at that point looking ahead to the summer window, and yeah, the fact that obviously we were linked with Thiago Holm as of even last week. So it just shows you there's a kind of continuity in terms of transfers. That regardless of the manager, this looked like a signing that's been on the cards. Obviously, I haven't seen him play, but by all accounts, just by reading some of the kind of reports from Norwegian commentators and just generally, he's been earmarked as kind of one of the top wonder kids around Europe. I've seen that he's in a couple of lists where they kind of rate the top 100 kind of players to look out for under the age of 21, and he was on that list as well. So yeah, it seems like he's quite an exciting talent, and it's the kind of market that we do have to operate in as well. Obviously we want to see a few more of the kind of bigger signings that we seen last season with the the £6 million mark or upwards. Now I think that's the kind of range that we should be aiming at as well. But you do have to sometimes get these kind of gems where you're picking them up before some of the other sides maybe have noticed them, and trying to get in there early. So yeah, by all accounts, he seems like a kind of progressive midfielder who can carry the ball well. Not afraid to get a tackle on as well. And I think if he can, bring some different qualities to the players we've already got, then that's going to be encouraging.
And it makes sense to bring another midfielder in when there's, obviously James McCarthy is a big question mark. Aaron Moy's a question mark at this point. He seemed to be really hampered by injuries towards the end of the season. So it's to have another young player coming in who we can develop wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. As you say, I think he's a midfielder who'll be very comfortable fitting into the way Celtic operate. I don't think he's an outright number 10, for example. I think he's one of those kind of hybrid players who can play across the midfield. So I'd be excited to see him in action in the hoops. Hopefully that gets completed soon. We're expecting Brendan Rodgers' first press conference. I think the early word, Asim, was that it might be Friday. We've not had confirmation from the club on that yet. We've not had confirmation from the club whether there'll be kind of a fan media type event that we'll get to attend as well. So that's all still pending. But that first press conference is going to be really interesting, isn't it? We've not heard from, well, obviously, Brendan Rodgers had a written statement as part of the announcement, but we've not actually heard from Brendan Rodgers yet. He's not done an interview with club media. Be interesting to hear from him and kind of how he approaches this kind of return and what he says and what kind of questions will be asked for him. Do you think he's going to have to address the kind of leaving for Leicester thing in terms of the fan perception of it? Is he going to have to address, some fans' feeling of him coming back? How do you see him handling that? And how much of that do you think will be part of his first press conferences?
I'm really intrigued to see how this goes. I don't know what you make of it, but I feel like it was quite a low key appointment from, like, in terms of announcement from the club. It felt kind of, and I think that was deliberate and almost I think the right way to go about it. Obviously, the club knew it was going to be a controversial appointment. We've seen that already since the announcement, and with certain uh, parts of the fan base not happy with it. So I think that was always going to be the case. But I'm intrigued to see how it goes. I think it will inevitably be brought up. I think that will be amongst one of the first few questions. I think you'll have something prepared. I don't anyone kind of expecting an apology. I don't think that will be the case. He's hardly going to come out and I think say sorry for leaving. I just don't see that being the case. But I think he'll obviously word it very carefully. in terms of, similar to the kind of statement, and try and brush it off. But I think he will address it without actually apologising. Um, from my perspective, obviously, I've seen a lot of different opinions. I don't know what you make of it, but I don't, like you said, I don't think I expect all fans to forgive or forget, or even, like you say, overly be, best give them loads of adulation or anything. But I do think it's an important time now for the fan base. Oh, look, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but I think it's a good time to kind of be united in terms of now, when the football gets started. We just want to all be, heading in the one direction. But we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued about what kind of pattern he's going to be kind of hitting out with. It infamously had a lot of patter during his first reign and has a lot of patter generally. I wonder if he'll be more careful with his language and the kind of things that he says. And I'm just very intrigued from that sense of things. I think for me, I'd be quite interested to hear in kind of the discussions that he's had with figures who are still at the club. Perhaps Peter Lawwell, it did seem, I don't know if he'll answer this in any kind of revealing way, of course. It would be very diplomatic if he did answer it, but I wonder if there'll be a question about kind of if that relationship did break down during his first spell and kind of what's been said to kind of, soothe his ambitions and worries or concerns this time around, and how that is going to move going forward. I think it'd be interesting to hear an answer on that. As always, I think there'll be a lot of diplomacy, won't there? There'll be a lot of
Yeah.
it might be a lot of bit of fence sitting as well, and that's fair enough. I wouldn't like to be doing one of these press conferences, to be honest with you. So I'm just very intrigued about what you'll say, and what kind of stuff you'll come out with.
Yeah, I
Um,
think the other thing as well, with because obviously you'll, from the initial inquiries or rumors about Rodgers was kind of being linked with the job. I think the fan feeling was very split, and I think gradually you've seen that change. And I wonder if, obviously, the nature of how Ange left is ties into that as well, where I think a lot of us now are probably just seeing it for how it is, and in terms of a purely football point of view now, where before we're all guilty of it, and it's part of what makes it brilliant. We do get emotionally attached. We do hang on to every word, and for me, this was probably my personal wake up call, because I think, the last time with Rodgers, I'll be the first to admit, when he left, I was, calling him everything under the sun. I was not happy, and even in my kind of group chats with pals, it's still quite divided. But my argument is now, I think it's just a realization, of the way football is. Everyone will do what's right for them. And like you said earlier, if we have 2 successful years again under Rodgers and then he ups and goes, or any manager for that sake, I think now we just come to accept that that's a good thing for the club. If we're winning trophies and we're successful, then there is always a ceiling above Celtic for players and managers, that they see their ambitions as higher, and we just have to accept that now. So I think that's where I've came round to the idea now. People might say, "Oh, you were the biggest critic of him," but I think it's just a realization that things have changed, and I think Ange leaving is probably the thing that's triggered that for me.
and I wonder if that's the tone he'll go for. If he's just like, I'm just here to win. Like, I wonder if that he'll just be as forthright as that. I wonder if he'll try to just pack a lot of it. I don't really want him to come away with apologies and big,
Yeah,
like big mea culpas and kind of engage again with the support on an emotional level. I don't think anyone's looking for that from this. I think everyone's just looking for get one of the best managers we could have got in the door and get him on with, and just get him on with the business of taking care of Rangers and the rest of Scottish football next season, and delivering on this apparent ambition to make us a force in Europe, which I think is quite easy to be skeptical about, given our recent history.
yeah,
I don't think we've performed nearly as close to what we could in Europe based on the resources we have, and I want Celtic to do a lot more of that. So I'm slightly skeptical of all that until I see it play out. Obviously, I think there's a lot to prove on the European
yeah.
front with Celtic, and I hope that they go about proving that. But I hope there's not too much big chat about Europe. I hope they just get on with the task and kind of do their talking on the pitch, as they did a lot, under Ange Postecoglou.
Yeah, I think naturally, obviously, we're on the back of a treble, so a lot of the expectations will be to continue that domestic dominance. But you've seen already with a lot of the kind of snippets that have came out, whether it's from Rodgers' side or the Celtic PR, but there has been a lot of chat about Europe. Um, as a fan, I think for me that I like that because I do, as you've said, I do feel that's the next step. We have to do a lot better. We need to start thinking about, can we get into the knockout stage? Can we win a knockout round? That's more than within the realms of possibility, and I think that should be our aim this season. Whether that's obviously the Champions League might be a step too far, we'll wait and see. But even just Europa League, so I'm intrigued, and I do like the fact that we are talking about that. But I'm excited because I remember obviously when Ange left, we were all in a downer. But I'm almost, and I'm not just saying this because people might be like, oh, just the reason of it, but you're almost even more excited now for this next season just because it is change. It is someone we know well. We know he was a top quality manager. We know what he's achieved before. And obviously the talk of what we might have to spend. You are excited to see what transfer activity there'll be. And I think it's an exciting time again. And again, credit to the board and credit to Rodgers himself. He knows he's not going to be a unanimously popular appointment here. So it takes balls from him to come and put himself in this situation, but he obviously backs himself. And for me, that's a win-win situation for us because we know that we've got a manager here who knows he's got a lot to prove, a lot to get the fans back fully on side. And we know he's big on his kind of reputation and things, so he'll come here fully expecting to be just as successful, if not even more, and make that impact in Europe this time, which I know he's been criticised a lot for some of our European results last time, but I think when you look at it on the whole, it wasn't disastrous. I think you mentioned we had six qualifiers in the 2 seasons, which he had to navigate. That's never easy. He got us only our second ever away win in the Champions League, and a couple of other good results as well. Granted, there was some poor ones, but I think if we can improve on what we did last season under Ange, then that'll be progress.
There's a comment here. Strange Love the Doctor says Brendan should come at the presser cold like a great white shark. I'm here to win. That's what I'm going for. I'm just going for that pure cold hearted cynicism from Brendan Rodgers. If we're going to bring Brendan Rodgers back, the man who left us in the middle of the season, we might as well go full throated with it and go, the guy's here to win. Let's get on the back of that and make it all about winning and making it all about Celtic being successful. That'll go a long way to turn around any lingering bad feeling. Which personally, I don't really have. I'm not sitting here resenting his appointment, but at the same time, I'm not, totally celebrating his character and the great man that he is. I just want him in here, in the door, winning like a great white shark, like that guy just said. Now, we're coming to the end of the show. Robert Dotts just said, where is Hamish? Hamish is on his holidays. I know he was back on Monday, but he had a couple of weeks off. Took it what looked like was going to be the quietest couple of weeks of the year and ended up being some of the busiest weeks of the year. So I'm kind of filling in a couple of live shows to keep things ticking over and keep us up to date with all the latest going on and talking points. Hopefully I've managed to do that. Myself and Asim have managed to do that this evening for you. Hopefully we're giving you enough to talk about. Hopefully you fill the comment section with good debate and good humour, which is what we always like to see. And we'll be back soon. Hamish is back next week and I'll be back on the channel soon. Sure, Asim will too. Asim, any final thoughts on Rodgers, and as the Rodgers era begins, any final thoughts for our viewers?
Yeah, I think it still feels a bit surreal. I think until we actually see him at that press conference, it's when it'll really sink in because it's been such a whirlwind. Everything's happened so quick. It's came out of nowhere. Obviously, when we were first rumored with him, and now just to see it finally announced earlier this week, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm looking forward to Friday, and I think that's when it'll really hit home and we can see what he's got to say for himself, and you'll soon obviously see all the kind of different transfer rumors and I'm definitely excited. As you mentioned, I did not expect this summer to be as hectic as it's obviously going to be now. But it makes for exciting times, and yeah, you just hope everyone will kind of get on board and head in the one direction and back him now.
Right, I've got one final question for you, a yes or no question, which you can answer, and hopefully everyone in the comments can answer too. Are Celtic going to break their transfer record this summer? Yes or no, Asim?
9 million, wasn't it, for Edward? No, no. I think we'll get a
Okay.
few big signings, but I don't think we'll break the nine. But I think we'll get a few in the kind of 6, 7, 8 mark.
I'm going to go for a yes on that one. I'm going to be bold and say that we can do it. So big summer ahead. Let us know in the comments what you think of that one. Any kind of players you would want us to see target, or any kind of positions you want to see target. Particularly, I'm sure Hamish will be doing more transfer stuff next week when he returns. For now, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you for joining me, Asim. Thanks for joining us live if you did. Thanks for joining us not live if you're checking us out after. And we'll see you again next time on 67 Hail Hail. Goodbye.